Good morning. I might just wait a few minutes for a few people to join. I think I might have a bit of internet lag. So if you do comment, I have noticed in past lives that when people comment, I don't actually see the comment for some time until after it's been posted. So I'm never ignoring people, I just don't see it. So here we are, growing our hair and our eyebrows, getting all a la naturel. Oh, natural. Oh, goodness. Good morning, everybody. So, last Monday, I did a live on partners who consistently attempt to parent our autistic children and our children with a PDA profile of autism, that is pathological demand avoidance, with authority and control and conventional parenting despite our best efforts to prevent it. Now, I did this live last Monday because I get so many emails and comments and messages from people, and this is a genderless topic. Gender is completely irrelevant. I get all these messages of contact from people who ask me, how do I get my partner on board with understanding that there is a very particular way to word things with my child, that they don't respond well to control, that they don't respond well to conventional reward and punishment. Hi Brenda, hi Fiona. And I thought, well, rather than emailing everybody back, I'll just talk about it on a live. Now, I can only share my own experience based on my life, based on engagement with lots of families, based on being a PDA myself, being married to a PDA, having children with a PDA profile. And so that's what I can talk about. So, I also want to announce that I normally do everything in my life intuitively and in the moment when I get the urge and it feels right, including lives. I never tend to announce, oh, I'm going to go live. I just do it in the moment. And because I announced that I'm going live this morning between 9 and 10, I'm acutely aware that I have this PDA response going on. And one of the strategies that my PDA brain will implement is to scatter my thoughts and to make me forget what I'm going to talk about in order to avoid the demand. Even when it's my idea, it's still a demand. So I'm going to do my very best to move through that, but I may not be able to, and I might have to come back at another time unannounced. And I know that sounds absolutely hilarious and ridiculous, but that's PDA for me. So, back to the topic of our partners. Or maybe it's us. Maybe it's us that is having the struggle with parenting our children differently, and we find ourselves trapped inside of conventional parenting methods and ideals and beliefs and systems. How could we not? How could we not struggle to move away from those types of parenting? That's what we've been raised with. It's what anybody ever talks about. Like I said during the last live, all you've got to do is look in the comments section on a video or a post or anything on social media where a child is having a tantrum on an aeroplane, or somebody's, even when adults have done something wrong, you'll still see somewhere along the lines in the comments section someone blaming their parents. Well, if they were raised in a particular way, they wouldn't have turned out like that, would they? I'm not sure at what age we stop blaming parents for the way human beings turn out, and that's going to be a part of this discussion too. So, as most of you know, I have just returned home on Friday from being in quarantine for 2 weeks with my eldest daughter, who was infected with COVID-19. She's 100% well, everybody's negative now. But in that time, I was an hour and a half away from my home. My children were at home with my husband, and I didn't have a worry in the world about the parenting because it's been a long process for our family and we don't always get it right. Nobody's ever always going to get it right with their children. There are going to be days where we lose our cool and we yell and scream, or we go to our room and we shut the door and our children are screaming and headbutting the floor outside, and it's very upsetting. But we're human as well, and it's really important to consider the potential for our own neurodivergence. There are so many parents out there raising autistic children who still don't know that they are autistic themselves, because we're often focused on a particular presentation of autism, and that might be our children. And that was me for a long time. I was focused on my now 9-year-old who presented in a very specific way. You could almost say textbook autistic. And so I never would have thought I would be autistic until I knew I was. So if we are an autistic person with unmet needs, if we are, I guess what is important to pay attention to is the frequency and severity of where we're coping or not. So it is normal, I hate that word, but it's normal for parents to struggle. It's perfectly normal for parents to, again, not get it right all the time. We're human beings. However, when we are autistic, it's important to pay attention to how excessive are our outbursts, or what we are perceiving as outbursts, or losing our cool, or not coping. Because it may not just be that we're losing our cool or that we're not getting it right. If we're autistic, we may have sensory overwhelm that we're not aware. Tactile defensiveness. Get to the end of the day in this household, and if it's been a big day, I cannot be touched, I cannot be talked to, or I will bite the head off the first person that approaches me. You don't have to be bombarded by sound or touch all day to be overwhelmed. You just need to be autistic and have sensory processing differences. So if you find that you're struggling more than the average person, then it's important to really think about whether you might be autistic or not. PDA is a whole other ball game. Control, excessive control. So when we look at conventional parenting, by the time a lot of families come to me, they'll say, our child's diagnosed autistic, but we know lots of families with autistic children, and our child is not like theirs. They can take direction and instruction, and they can do this and do that, and our child would never do anything that we ask them to do. That's the difference between a child with a PDA profile of autism and a non-PDA profile of autism. So if our children are resisting instructions, resisting suggestions, resisting implied demands a lot of the time, this is what makes them pathologically demand avoidant. So demand avoidance is something that everybody experiences at some time, and there are different kinds of demand avoidance, but the key word here is pathological, that makes it a neurological condition, something that we're born with, something that we die with. It's autism. It is a profile of autism. Therefore, it is also genetic because it is a profile of autism. So it is highly likely that at least one parent is also going to share a neurotype with our child, if not both. Now, we talked about this last time when I did a live and talked about the potential for a parent to also have unidentified pathological demand avoidance, or PDA. This will present differently in adults. So if we think about the way our partner who doesn't want to take information that we consistently provide them with, who doesn't want to learn anything from us, or again, it might be us that's having that struggle, because my hand goes up as a PDAer. I don't want my husband to tell me anything. I don't want him to pass me information. I don't want him to tell me about something he read about PDA or autism yesterday. He wouldn't do that anyway. He knows better. But there are very good reasons why a person with a PDA profile doesn't take on board the information that we shove in front of them. We think we're being helpful. The person who is sharing the information, we just want to service our children. We want the best for our children. So we say, okay, team member, co-parent, here's the information. Let's get on the same page and parent from the same space. With a PDA, there's not going to be consistent flow like that, particularly when the PDA is unidentified and unrecognised. And the more a person talks about it and says, well, maybe you should get tested, or maybe you should read this and see if you identify yourself in this, that's not going to be helpful. So the first thing that we can do is to create the same flexibility and space as we would for our children, for our partner. We can work on changing our language, the way that we speak and communicate with our partner. And a lot of us have trouble with this because we think, well, why in the bloody hell should I be the one doing all the research, knowing all the stuff, finding all the facts, implementing all the strategies, and how in the bloody hell are we going to have any success parenting in this way if my partner won't get on board and be on the same page? And yes, that can be frustrating, very frustrating. Demand pressure is something that triggers a person with a PDA profile. Demand pressure is not just taking instructions, being told what to do, following suggestions. That's not only what demands are. Demands are also implied expectations. So even if we're imagining them, they are still going to work in the same way on our brain as someone telling us what to do. So here's a key piece of information about partners who consistently parent with control. In the moment, when we're in the same space with our partner, and again, maybe it's us, we can often feel pressure to perform. We feel like we're being watched. And this is one characteristic of PDAs that I know many of us share. We feel demand pressure in the space with other people when we have to do something. We don't like the idea that other people might be watching us or listening to us or paying attention to what we're doing. It's too much pressure. So when we keep that in mind, what we know, what we understand, and what some of us who are here now may have even experienced, I know I have and I do, is that when I'm having a moment with my children, particularly a difficult moment, I feel a lot of pressure when I'm in the space with adults who I think may be judging the way I'm handling this moment. And so I do not parent from a space of intuition and connection in that moment. I parent from a space of being pissed off. I parent from a space of feeling triggered. I parent from a space of wanting to gain some form of compensation, to get some form of control back. Because when I feel pressured as a PDA, when I feel like there's an implied expectation or demand, I need to feel like I can get my control back because I feel way out of control in that moment. Now, this is not about ego. This is not about weakness. This is not about a person needing to be better than everyone else. This is about a pathological neurological condition, a profile of autism, a neurotype, a disability, an invisible disability. Whether we acknowledge that or not as a person, whether we put our hand up and say, yes, I'm a PDA, doesn't matter. If it's there, it's there. Unidentified, unacknowledged, it's there, it's present, it's real. So in that moment, the way that I might compensate is to try and trigger the other person who I think is watching. Now, unfortunately, what the person in that moment completely misses because of the neurology is that it's the children who pay the price. It's the children who lose out in that moment, not the partner. It's us, it's the partner and the children. And this is difficult for a person with an unidentified condition to understand or acknowledge in that moment. But it's much the same way as when we are overwhelmed, overloaded, bombarded, and we have an outburst or a meltdown that we cannot control, that we cannot stop or prevent because we don't see it coming. It's not something that we make a conscious choice about. So our partner in that moment doesn't say, well, stuff it. Who cares if the kids are collateral damage in this? I'm going to go for the jugular on my partner because they're watching how I'm parenting. And there's often little ability to be able to communicate what's going on in here and here because we don't know. This is why it's so important for us to know who we are, to understand how our brain works. So when we witness our partner having those difficult moments with our children and not taking the time, not having the patience to really tune in and parent from a space of intuition, to create flexibility, to change their language, they're not able to do that in the moment if there's another adult there, if there's another person there hovering, even if we're in another room sometimes, the knowledge that we're there can be enough to create a barrier there. Now, I want to make this very clear. There's no blame, there's no one being at fault here. It's not our job to every time our child is having a hard time and we think our partner's going to deal with it, we run out of the house and go down the road so our partner can connect with our children. It's not going to work like that. But the more awareness that we have about what we can do to create flexibility and space to enable our children to connect with the other parent, then we can empower the situation as much as we can. But we are never ever responsible for another adult. We don't take on the responsibility for the actions, the behaviour, the thoughts and feelings and the experience of another adult. We don't do that. That's not our job. We look after ourselves. So eyes off others and onto ourselves. That's why we're focusing on the steps that we can take in order to help. And that's when we move in to this really important conversation that doesn't happen enough. Boundaries. Boundaries and the very fine line between understanding and accepting a person's neurology and moving into family violence or threatening situations that are harmful and unhealthy. I think that this conversation needs to be had more often because it's not happening enough. And here's the reality about human beings. Human beings, when they don't have their needs met as children, when we don't have our needs met as children, we will spend the rest of our lives seeking out how to have those needs met. And we won't know what the needs are. We'll just feel an emptiness. We'll feel an abundance of emptiness. And we will look to extrinsic things to fill that space, to meet those needs, whether it be partners, whether it be alcohol or drugs or food or gambling or video games or whatever it is that a person uses to feel better about themselves because they haven't had their needs met as children. Now, if you understand that for the average person, and then we think about a person with a PDA profile, and we understand that anybody who's an adult today with a PDA profile, the likeliness of them growing up in a home where conventional parenting was largely enforced, where there was very little acceptance and understanding for children who resisted demands, who could not follow instructions, then we understand that even when parents did their very best, and again, this is not about shame and blame and fault, even when families did their very best to meet the needs of children with a neurodivergent profile, those people, if they are unidentified, they don't know they're autistic, they don't know they're ADHD, they don't know they're PDA, whatever their neurodivergence is. The experience of not knowing until adulthood is that we go our whole lives thinking there's something wrong with us and seeking out ways to fill the space that's left. Now, specifically, people with a PDA profile, I see this happen a lot. What I see is the need for the safe person in childhood, sometimes referred to as an obsession in the pathology and the research about PDA. Usually a child with a PDA profile will latch on to a safe person, and that safe person will see all of their most difficult behaviour and their challenges. It's who they can be 100% themselves with. It's who they can fall apart with. It's who they might even be violent and aggressive with. It's who they know will meet their needs. When children with a PDA profile don't have that person, when they haven't had those needs met, they consistently seek out safe people. And as a woman, I can tell you I went searching for that safe person in anybody that would give me even a hint of thinking I was just a bit of all right. They didn't even have to be a safe person because I didn't know what a safe person was. So then we see two different extremes. We see the person partner up with who they think is a safe person, and often they're not. Or we see the PDA who consistently has this profile where they need to exercise control. And sometimes that need for control or that need for freedom, it grows because it hasn't been addressed, it hasn't been recognised, it hasn't been loved and accepted. This profile, this way of being in the world, this PDA has not been identified and accepted. And so it grows, this need for freedom. Because when we grow up in homes that don't identify what our needs are, and that's a really difficult thing to do, then we potentially continuously feel like our freedom is quashed, our autonomy is quashed. And the first thing to know about a PDA is that we have this inherent need for freedom and autonomy, and we will seek it in whatever way we can get it. And sometimes that will mean we will go into partnerships and intimate relationships with others and into parenthood with this excessive need to control people, places and things, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know why we do that. I didn't know why I was doing that. I had no idea why I was so excessively controlling. I wouldn't allow anything to be a tiny smidgen outside of my control. Everything had to be the way I needed it to be, otherwise I would not cope. And my entire family would pay. I would yell and scream, and I would have meltdowns. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea how my brain worked. But it's really important for us to understand that in a family situation, if we are under chronic stress and fear, if we're tiptoeing around, if we are walking on eggshells, it's really important to assess how important is it that this situation be worked on when we've been working on it for many years and it's either getting worse or it's not improving at all. That's a difficult decision to make. It's a difficult consideration, a very difficult consideration, because often we're looking at a family with diverse needs that are unmet. But I would always encourage families to put their children first. Children first always, because then we run the risk of having more adults coming into the world, seeking ways to fill that space of unmet needs. There are so many different ways that we can come together with adult PDAs in our homes, and I know that's true because I came from that space of being excessively controlling, of having my children never tell me anything because of the way I would respond, of my partner telling me, "You don't know how much power you hold in this house." And you know, it has gone both ways in the past. So I know that it's possible for that to change. I know it's possible. Also, sometimes we need to get out of our own way in order for our partners to establish relationships with our children, because that needs to be fluent and flexible and intuitive. And if we're constantly hovering over and saying, "Well, I know you did it that way, but this is how I would do it." I've just come back from being away for 2 weeks, and I've witnessed the most beautiful changes in the connection that my husband has with our children. He already had beautiful connections. But the patience and the consideration and hearing him share with me, we've built these, him saying we've built these connections that are just so wonderful and beautiful. And I understand why she thinks that way. I've been able to watch her and I understand why she does that. Now, I know this stuff. I know why she does a lot of the things she does, Miss Five. But I want to hold space for my partner. It's important for us to put our stuff aside and hold space for our partners. Let them tell us stuff we already know. Let them share with us about this incredible connection they've made with our children. It's really important to provide the same environment for ourselves and our partners as adults when we're PDAs as we do for children. Are there any questions before I wrap up? Because, wow, I've been talking for half an hour again. Hi everyone. How can you find someone who acknowledges this? So many prefer to sweep it under the rug or put in the too hard basket. Linda, are you talking about your partner? Like your partnership, I should say. It is difficult, I find, because I'm going to assume that you were talking about your partnership. This is why it's really important too to find therapists that understand neurodivergence, because if we as autistic people, and particularly PDAs, go to professionals who don't understand the way our brain works, the first thing that they might tell somebody is get rid of your partner or separate from them. They're controlling and they'll never change. And that's not necessarily true. Yes, we'll always be PDAs. Yes, we'll always require an element of autonomy and flexibility and freedom, but there are ways that we can have those needs met and calm down our threat response and calm down our anxiety. I mean, yeah, it's really important to find the right professional. I absolutely agree. Yeah, very difficult. What if both partners are shut down from burnout? Yeah, so we would prioritise then. We would prioritise what comes first. If we're both shut down from burnout, then we would create a plan so that we'd create what I would consider a recovery plan, which would be a slow but steady process of addressing our needs as adults in very small ways so that we can first recover from burnout and then we address the other things. The way I've been coping with this unmet need for boundaries was, for me, learning to solo travel. I've been proud of flying to the Great Ocean Road 2 years ago because it is 10,000 miles away from my home in the USA. That is amazing, Brian. And I totally relate. I was terrified of flying until a couple of years ago. I still don't love it. But isn't it a really empowering feeling when we do those things? And the Great Ocean Road is amazing. I don't live too far away from there. My ex fits this profile and I cannot find any way to communicate with him. We have twin autistic children. How do I find a way to communicate? Charlotte, in changing the way that we communicate, so our language, the way that we word things. So my husband and I, we're very clear around how we prefer to be communicated with. So if I say something to my husband and he's triggered by it, he can let me know, and vice versa. You don't have that luxury. It sounds like there's a separation there and very strained communication, or it's not happening at all. Over time, I find that working on ourselves, and sometimes even in relationships, I say to families, again, eyes off others and onto ourselves. What life do I want to be living? And I just make a conscious decision, or encourage, families to make a conscious decision to just make a plan for yourself, continue on living in the way that you want to live, and allow that person to take responsibility for themselves. But Charlotte, we can definitely change the way that we communicate, but I want to make it really clear again, we're not taking responsibility for somebody else's stuff. When we're PDAs, and we know we're PDAs, and we're adults, we have every opportunity to build a toolkit to deal with our neurodivergence. An example of this is PDA is never an excuse to abuse somebody as an adult. It is never an excuse to mistreat people. There are meltdowns, there is being triggered, and I get that, and I live it, but I have a toolkit where when I experience being triggered by something somebody else says or does, I make a conscious effort in that moment to acknowledge that feeling of being triggered, acknowledge this internal process of rage, threat response going off. I acknowledge, I observe my thoughts and feelings coming and going for as long as I need to. I carry on as normal in that moment. I go away, I sit with the discomfort of what's happened. I process how I feel, and I don't put pressure on myself to sort it out. Eventually, I come to a space where I feel okay about it and I know how to respond. Now, my brain, as a PDA brain, will tell me all sorts of crazy things in order to detach me from people, places, and things that feel threatening. If a friend uses the wrong word and it triggers my PDA, my brain will remember all these times where that person demonstrated that they weren't a perfect person and I shouldn't be their friend anymore. I'm conscious of that. So I go away with these experiences and I discern whether a person actually mistreated me or whether my brain, being a PDA brain, has perceived that, and knowing the difference is important. You may find that there will be some people who will say, well, I'm a PDAer. If you don't like it, that's your problem. There will be some people who will be physically abusive, be verbally abusive to others, and they'll say, well, this is how I am. There's nothing I can do about it. But there's always opportunity to build a toolkit so that we are considerate of others. Unless we have a diagnosable condition, such as one of the antisocial personality disorders, for example, there is always potential to consider others. There is always the potential for empathy and to figure out a way that we can consider another person as well as ourselves. You know, being a PDA does not give me instant permission to treat somebody badly and then not take responsibility for it. And people might be surprised to hear me say that because I'm so pro-positive autistic identity, but we're still people. We still need to be responsible for ourselves. And as much as we may have a disability, as much as there's many things about our neurodivergence that we do not have control over, we can work toward having a toolkit to help ourselves. I think you just blew my mind on my lifelong need for independence and autonomy and my severe reaction burnout to becoming dependent on my husband due to chronic illness. I can't wait to hire you. Me and my son need it. Oh, that's lovely, Courtney. I'm so glad this has been helpful. How do I get professionals to understand my child is not typically autistic? He is 100% a PDA. I'm on the pathway myself and we are similar, but oh my God, so different. A lot of people ask this question, how do I convince my professional that my child is a PDA? It's difficult because PDA is quite new. The research started in the 80s. And in terms of research, that's very young. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Simone. And PDA is not a commonly recognised way of being. The UK are leaps and bounds ahead of Australia, for example, but there are professionals here that do recognise and do specialise in PDA. My first question is it necessary for a professional to acknowledge this? Why are we using the professional? What are we getting out of having them on board? Are they really helping us? Is it enough for us to know and for us to implement tools and approaches that are PDA friendly? I think it's important to really consider whether we do need our professionals to understand. Sometimes we really do, because if we're using them for writing reports for funding or for NDIS plans, that's really important. But yeah, it's difficult, but there are definitely professionals out there that know their stuff. Any more questions before I go? I'll just wait a couple of seconds because I know when people type there's a little bit of lag. I feel that once a family accepts that self-diagnosis or not, it can often be all we need. Absolutely, Tanya. And I think it's important to know that in the autistic community, you know, the adult community is very accepting of people who are self-identified, because there are so many incredible barriers to being assessed and diagnosed. First of all, cost, professionals not knowing enough and thinking that they do, still being focused on the same characteristics as 70 years ago, and you know, having this gateway of professionals to tell us whether or not we can identify as who we know we are. So self-identification is totally acceptable. My husband has a difficult time stopping behaviour despite being told how upsetting it is. He wants to do it more. Is this PDA or ODD? Oh, yeah. Could be both. As a PDA, I absolutely relate. As soon as I'm told I cannot do something or please don't do that, I feel this incessant, whole body consuming urge to do it. Depends on what it is though. Okay. I hope you all have a great day. Here comes the gutter cleaning truck. Great timing. Toodaloo!